Hello, and welcome to the Grow Places podcast, where we explore the virtuous circle of people, growth, and place. Brought to you by Grow Places and hosted by our founder, Tom Larsson.
Emily, hi.
Hello, how are you?
I'm really good, thanks. Really good. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me.
We're in this lovely space, nice and relaxed. It feels perfect for a really good conversation.
Oh well, let's see what happens as an unwell child not far from here.
Exactly.
So let's see how we get on. But it's lovely to see you.
That's good. Well, everyday life is what we're really interested in on this platform. So
that's very useful then.
Exactly. And thanks for humouring me today in terms of this conversation. You know, I know you're used to speaking to the likes of Dan Doctoroff and Bjarke Ingels and many other renowned people from around the world. And so, it'd be great to learn your perspective on those conversations, speaking to them, your unique position within the industry as well. But before we dive into it, why don't you give everyone a bit of an introduction to yourself?
Oh, do you know, that is the hardest question, isn't it? Of all the questions, and I'm so used to asking the questions, and I always think, well, that's the easy one, but it's not, is it? To have to suddenly think, well, who am I? What do I do? So I'm Emily Wright, and I'm a real estate journalist focusing on, across the sector, but design, architecture, traditional real estate as well, and I've always had a very global scope. I was an EG for 12 years and now I split my time. So I'm a freelance journalist for part of my time and I've moved towards publications like Wallpaper, Design, The Spaces. So really taking on a bit more of that architectural and design content. I'm also head of content at CREtech, which is a New York-based conference company for the built world, really focusing on innovation and sustainability. And if that wasn't enough, honestly, the number of email addresses I have, I launched a Substack, I think, when was that? Gosh, June last year, called Well Placed, which is focused on human-centered design. And I did that because that's where my passion lies, and I really wanted an outlet to just focus on human-centered design. And we'll come on to this, but it's interesting because I did that in June last year and thought, well, this is going to be such a great outlet. But it's almost like since then, in the past 6 months, the focus on human-centered design more generally has really picked up, which is fantastic in many ways. So it's an interesting one because it sort of feels like that was going to be going off into like the area of interest that was maybe slightly off from the mainstream, and it's coming into the mainstream so quickly, which is what we all want. So that's it. There you go.
Yeah, amazing. So I always like to sort of zone in and start with passion and purpose, and so maybe let's start there then, and we can sort of zoom out. So why do you feel that what you're doing at Well Placed is so purposeful for you?
Well, having been a journalist in this space for over 20, just about 20 years, you get such an amazing view of this sector, of this industry, and it's an industry that touches so many people. And it's really interesting. So I was speaking to someone the other day, and they said, "Oh, I suppose the thing about writing about real estate is that it's quite niche." And I said, "Well, no, it might seem like that, but do you live in a building? Do you work in a building? Do you travel through cities? Do you it's not niche at all. It touches absolutely everything." And then looking at that industry over the past 20 years, right from the start, I'd always thought, and this is interesting because it shows how much the industry has changed. Right from the start, I thought, it's an amazing industry, but it doesn't make much sense that the end user is so often not thought about. And when I first started writing about this wonderful world of real estate, that was very much the case. And I remember actually almost having to be apologetic, writing articles about well-being or how places made you feel. I think I even remember writing a line in it saying, "Oh, I know there might be some eye rolls when I say this," and that just wouldn't be the case now. But it's always been a passion of mine, and the way that places and spaces make us feel is visceral. It's so deep rooted. And it can be so powerful, and I've always thought, well, if it can be that powerful for the end user, the commercial element behind that has to be there. It has to be, because you're elevating someone's life, someone's experience. And as I said when I launched Well Placed, the difference between a good space and a bad space can be the difference between a good day and a bad day, and in extreme cases, it can be the difference between a good life and a bad life. And actually saying that actually makes me feel quite emotional that the industry has that much power, and that's where the passion comes from. And I just wanted to write about it and write about the people who are doing great things. And I've never wanted to be a sort of critical of a sector that I think works very hard in many ways and often actually gets the blame pinned on it for a lot of things that, I'm not sure is always fair. So I'm not one to say, well, the industry hasn't always been very good at this, or the industry still isn't very good at this. But I think it would be true to say that it's been something of a blind spot, and that's changing, which is amazing to see. But it is visceral, and it is something which is incredibly deep rooted, as I say, within all of us. And that is why I wanted to launch Well Placed and write about this stuff, because as far as I could see, it was about as close to speaking directly to people, whether that be the industry or the end user, as I could imagine. So that's why I did it.
Yeah, no, amazing. And I think that the way that we talk about what we do as a industry, and also obviously particularly you commentating on the industry itself, is so important, isn't it? To that, obviously actions speak louder than words, and we need to, as an industry, continue to keep trying to do the right thing for people, for places. But that role of commentating, of talking, of almost portraying the work of the industry in a certain way, how do you see that? Because that is obviously a real responsibility. It's a great position to be in. You've mentioned that you've worked at publications like EG, which is kind of narrow industry focused, but then Wallpaper, Dezeen, and others, they're much broader. They're much more for everyone to consume, as opposed to just a surveyor or an engineer. So how do you see that?
Well, I think that's the beauty of the industry, is that, and it goes back to what I was saying before, is that people might think it's niche, but it's not. So it's the same stuff in a slightly different language and a slightly different tone. So with the industry, obviously, it's much more focused on the internal workings and what, and within the industry, of course, it depends on who you're talking to within the industry. And I've always, I don't know why, but I'm very pleased I'm this way inclined. I've always had my attention captured by what's coming up. So in 2013, it was tech and innovation. I went out to San Francisco and met all the sort of the people that were operating within the real estate firms, but really focusing on tech out there, who were in the heart of it in Silicon Valley. And then well-being, wellness. So from my perspective, my role as a commentator, not entirely, but has largely been about identifying future trends and then reporting back to the industry and saying, oh, have you seen this? Have you seen that? Never, why aren't you doing this? You've missed a trick. That's something I've always tried very hard to avoid. Maybe there's someone watching this thinking, there's a piece back in 2014 that would beg to differ. But that's never been my intention. So I don't believe that chastising a sector is a great way to get any kind of change moving forward. So as a commentator within the sector, it's, as I say, very much been about identifying future trends and reporting back and hoping to give people some inspiration and some reassurance that things can be done, changes can be made. There's been a lot of reassurance that's been needed around a lot of this stuff, whether it be innovation or well-being, that it's commercially viable, and there's nothing to be ashamed of there. There are some amazing players within this sector who are incredibly outspoken on that. Tim Heatley from Capital and Centric, a very sort of social impact focused developer. He does it because he believes in it, but he said, and this is a quote that he gave me once, I'm not doing it because I'm a goody two-shoes. I'm doing it because I want to make money. And I want to make money, but I also want to do it in a way which, is important for the wider community. And again, Martin Evans, Landsat, you and I said that there should be no shame in, architects, designers, developers wanting to do this stuff, this great stuff, but there has to be a commercial element to it too. So I think that's been quite an important role in sort of reporting back on these issues as they've been coming down the line and saying, this is important, this is why it's important, these are the people who are doing it already, this is how they're doing it, these are the challenges, this is how they're overcoming them. And then ultimately, whilst not being critical, sometimes saying, if we don't do this, or if the industry doesn't do this, it might find itself in a bit of a sticky situation, because this is what demand is looking like. This is where demand is going. So that's the industry commentary. And then when it comes to the wider, broader stuff, I think it's similar, but it is, I suppose, more about taking certain elements of what that industry does so beautifully and then inspiring the outside world, meaning that we have less and less people who say, oh, well, it's quite niche, isn't it? Like, that's what I'm trying to do there, and say, look at this building, look at this incredible building. It might just look like a commercial project to you that a developer that you don't know much about is doing, but actually this building could change the way we live. This building could change the way we work. And that's what I'm trying to do there, whether it's a building or a beautiful piece of furniture or anything like that, something that has captured someone's interest and imagination, and that is going to have an impact on the way we live. And that makes me feel like, even if that reaches one person who previously didn't think they knew much about the real estate sector, or didn't understand how much of an impact the real estate sector has on their daily lives. I mean, one of my favourite things I did was writing a piece about what Stanhope were doing, actually, with one of their city London office buildings, and wrote about it for a design magazine where the readership is, much more broad. And I felt quite proud doing that, because I thought, well, this is an opportunity to take something which normally wouldn't register on people's radars and show them what this industry is doing and what it's capable of. So there's a lovely crossover between the two, and I do try and bridge that gap as much as I possibly can.
Yeah, amazing. And as you say, profit is definitely not a dirty word. It's fundamental, isn't it, as an enabler to making all the other things happen. Big capital projects in development or design. I don't think many people in our industry want to remain on paper. People want to see things realised, want to see things built, and that's never going to happen unless things are viable, and that's so critical. And so when you talk about everyday people, consumers, however you want to frame that, i.e. not industry professionals, what are those things that really kind of pique interest then, in terms of something that you would see in a project, see in a place, see in a piece of furniture, that you go, right, I really need to share that in these publications because it's going to resonate with people?
So there's the two things. There's two tracks, and one of them is just it's just the way in which we live our lives now, and the other one is sort of a slightly deeper way of looking at things. So one is the aesthetic, and that is something that I would love for it not to be so important, but at the same time, something that doesn't have to look beautiful, because I think that that's subjective, but something that looks arresting, engaging, that looks different, that captures something. We live in the world of social media, and that's something that I'm always keeping an eye out for. But more than that, it's something that I've touched on earlier in our conversation. It's something that I look at and I think people need to know about that, because that is going to either change the way they live their lives, change the way they think about living their lives, or inspire them to look at the world around them differently. So one of my favorite examples, I was on holiday in Helsinki. I wasn't working. I was on holiday in Helsinki, and I walked past the Oodi library. I don't know if you've come across that, but and it was just, I sort of put my head around the door and was like, oh my gosh, like completely sucked in. Went to the reception desk and said, can someone give me a tour? And they were like, well, not really. I said, please, is there anyone here who knows anything about the design that could give me a tour? And I can try and write about it, and I'd love to write about it. And they're looking at me like, who's this woman? And they I don't know how, I must have persuaded them. They went and found someone. I got this tour of this incredible building, which in my mind is one of the most amazing examples of public placemaking, but we'll come on to that, but public space that I've ever seen. And it is beautiful. So there was that, arresting, and very visual. But what it was that captured my interest, and I wrote about it for EG and a sort of broader, more design publication. So I wrote about it for the industry, and I wrote about it for human beings more generally. what was amazing about it was some of the stuff that's not even physical. I mean, the physical stuff was incredible. There was a whole floor dedicated to elevating the people of Helsinki or, Finland to be able to achieve their dreams. I mean, how amazing is that? So 3D printers that were free to use, recording equipment that was free to use, sewing machines that were free to use, so people could launch their businesses or go and do a piece of work without having to fork out for their own 3D printer. Who's got the ability to do that? But then probably the most amazing thing was when I was leaving, the person that had been forced basically to give me an impromptu tour said the Wi-Fi around this building extends quite a long way out into the sort of the square around it. The building has purposely been built so that there is a canopy, a ring around the building. And they said that's so that people, particularly maybe school children who don't live in houses where there's fast enough Wi-Fi, can come and sit after the library itself is shut, do their homework or, do their university work or their work or whatever it might be. They're under a cover, they're dry, there's good Wi-Fi, it's a public meeting point, and it's basically a city asset for the people. That's amazing. Isn't that amazing? And I just thought, wow, that's something that the industry needs to know about, because that's a great idea. And that's something that people need to know about. And I think if the two sides are informed about these things, and that there's no, oh, well, that's not going to be interesting to humans in general, but it's going to be interesting to the industry. But so much about the world we live in is about information and knowing. And in my mind, the more the general public knows about this stuff, the more honed in the demands will be as to what people want from their spaces and places of the future. And the industry needs to know what those demands are to be able to deliver it. So if that makes sense, kind of operating the two at the same time.
Yeah, totally. And so what do you think, maybe more broadly than over your 20 years or so in the industry, maybe has changed around those narratives about what people care to read about, what people care to talk about, and does that leave you feeling like much more optimistic about where we're going or where we are?
Definitely. And I think there is an understandable and necessary tendency sometimes to say we've got so far to go, because we do. I think it would be wrong to say we didn't. But when you look at where we've come from, and I think that with 20 years of writing about this industry, interviewing people within this sector, I do have that. As with lots of people who have been in the sector for that long, I do have this kind of like markers in time where I can look back and think, oh gosh, I actually can't believe the world we lived in back when I started writing about this sector, not just the industry, but the world. And that's always going to be the way, isn't it? I think when you look back at it, 20 years is a long time. So when you look back over that period of time, it is quite shocking, really. And as I said, there were things like wellness, well-being, where for a while, it wouldn't be worth writing about it at all. And then when I started to write about it, it was almost, as I said, apologetically, like, please don't stop reading this. Please don't stop reading. Carry, and that's it, and I remember sort of launching covering the launch of well standards and being like, I hope people read this because this is important. And it's all, for so long, it was very much seen as an add-on. But I think that, and this is nothing against anyone particularly, it's nothing against, cultures and stuff. But I think that as the industry grows up and you have more people coming in with different values, I feel like well-being, whether it be emotional well-being or physical well-being, is really at the heart of what it is that people want from their spaces and places, and not in the way that I think it was wrongly perceived whenever it, 15, 20 years ago, which was, moany and a bit pathetic and all. That's just not the case. It's the essence of life, isn't it? How we feel. So I feel like that's changed a lot. The sort of pursuit of innovation and technology, that's an interesting one, because I think with that one, I think the will is there. I think with all these things, and it is worth talking about it, there is, there's always an issue around cost, isn't there? What's this going to cost? And anyone working in real estate is obviously part of their own business or a big business. And as we said before, commercial viability is really important. So I think that's been a barrier. And so it's quite good now to see that we're getting so far along the line. And I think maybe even more so in sort of well-being and climate than we are in sort of other areas of tech and innovation, that we're getting to the point now where it's getting more and more non-negotiable that we need these things. So people are working much harder to find solutions to that, and that's very exciting, really exciting. So I was talking to there's this very inspirational lady called Carrie Denning-Jackson. So she works for Jamestown. She's head of technology and innovation at Jamestown, which is a New York-based developer, and she is very, very concerned about the use of toxic building materials. And she's so concerned about it that she's getting to that point now, quite quickly, where she's identifying some of the problems and then coming up with solutions to saying, okay, so some of these more healthy, less toxic building materials, there's a cost issue with them. So why not have the developers that are looking to build with that sort of material club together, work out how much they need between them, buy in bulk. It's an opportunity for collaboration. It's an opportunity to use different materials. So whether or not that's realistic right now, I hope it is. I don't know, but it is really reassuring to hear some people talking about some of those solutions. But in terms of your wider question, how much has changed and how far have we come? Just so far. And I think that that is something to really be celebrated. And as I mentioned again previously, this industry has come under a lot of fire. For all kinds of things, climate's a big one, of course. Just coming under fire for not getting things right, creating issues. And while those statements in terms of what we're seeing happening in the world and the output that we're seeing from the real estate sector, for example, in terms of, emissions, while it's true to a degree, I just don't think chastising is the way forward. It's not encouraging. And where change, I would think that where change comes from best is a place of, urgency, because it is urgent, but hope and, encouragement. So that's what I'd say. We've come a long way to go, but no shame, no blame.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of that, where we go then collectively as an industry, but also, as a society, you've mentioned some examples already, whether it was going to California to visit people in technology, or your trips to the Nordics and that kind of much more natural, more humane kind of way of living. If tomorrow you had to get on a plane or a train or a bike or whatever it was, and go somewhere where you felt, okay, well, we could go and learn something as an industry from that place or that country, that sector, and bring that back. Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, well, this is the thing. They're getting on a plane. It's a tricky one, isn't it? So if I could teleport anywhere, well, there are examples all over. This is the thing I said in Well Placed. There are little pockets of brilliance. So I think it's quite difficult to pick one particular place, because you can have you can have somewhere where there's not much going on, but something absolutely incredible, and then somewhere where I suppose if I had to choose, then you mentioned the Nordics, but I always come back from the Nordics feeling incredibly inspired. And whether it's the Oodi Library or the Lolu Sauna, another building that I've written about for Well Placed, which is just the most beautiful example of bringing people together. Sauna culture is massive, obviously, over there. I'd had no idea how big it was until I went and took part in it, and actually went through a hole in the ice, because that's what you do. And I said to them, well, no, I'm not going to do that. And they looked at me as if to say, you get me, you are, because that's what we do. And then it was amazing, actually. So it's an incredible building, beautifully designed. It's on an old strip of land outside Helsinki, outside the main sort of hub of the city, that was disused, industrial. Nothing was going on. So they thought, well, let's do something with it. So that's already brilliant, isn't it? Right on the Baltic Sea. And I just remember having come out of the sauna in this incredible architectural gem of a building and sitting and having dinner after this sauna experience and just feeling so incredibly happy. And I think that mixture of beautiful design, health and well-being, just as part of a wider culture, is brilliant. And it's a timber building, and the stats are, I say don't quote me on this, but I'm saying it. So the stats are that you're something like 40% happier when you're surrounded by natural materials. And then you've got Stockholm and Wood City, which is another incredible project, ambitious project. And I'd be really interested to see how it actually manifests. But the biggest mass timber structure in the world, it's going to be. So, and speaking to Annika, who is leading that project out there, about the boldness that it takes to say it's never been done before. We're going to do it anyway. Why not? And then Copenhagen, and those areas. I mean, you mentioned Bjarke. So yes, I've spoken to him a few times. Obviously, an incredibly boundary pushing designer and developer from Denmark. And he'd said that he wanted to be a cartoonist, but there was no cartoonist university in the area. So then he decided to go into design. And that's, again, just inspirational stuff. Putting a ski slope and climbing wall on the same building as a waste power plant. And as I speaking to him about it this week, and I said, it's one of your, it's one of the projects that people talk about. And he looked and said, yeah. He said, there are lots of reasons why people don't put a ski slope on top of a waste energy plant, though. And then it just sort of like trailed off as if to say, but I did it anyway, and I think that's a very different way of thinking. And lots of the people that I've interviewed who've done incredible things do think differently to other people.
Yeah.
And they don't have that boundary. And as Bjarke said, whenever anyone comes to me and gives me all the reasons why my project won't work, and he said, and because of the projects I do, that happens a lot, I just see it as a to-do list of all the things that I need to fix to make it work. So he says, I see it's quite a helpful, useful thing.
Yeah, he does have that. I've had lunch with him in Tivoli, actually, in the
wow,
in the gardens there. It was quite amazing.
Oh my gosh!
And I think it's the audacity, actually, in some of the projects is that thing, isn't it? It's kind of just almost like the clarity of the idea around, people in Copenhagen love to ski, but there's nowhere to ski. So how can we provide that? And I think that aspect, you've almost got on one. He kind of sits in the, as I say, in the slightly audacious, slightly kind of one-off space, and then, as you said, that other aspect of kind of Nordic culture and life is very much the kind of the ordinary, the everyday, the cultural aspect of cold plungers, saunas, and other things.
And isn't it interesting that still, despite that being such a central part of the culture over there, and despite that being something that brings them great contentment and happiness, it's taken other places around the world, us included, quite a long time to actually equate wellness and well-being with.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, I do my cold shower every morning now.
Do you?
Which I love it now. It's really good because the stress response you get from the cold shock is the same as you get from any form of kind of anxiety or worry. So that physical response is the same. So if you can learn to control the physical responses and also obviously your mind when you're in cold water, it then will help you deal with stresses in other areas of your life. So there's a big thing to it, which is really, really interesting. Is that kind of, that whole kind of Wim Hof idea. But yeah, I love that, and saunas as well. And there's a startup actually which have come out. I think they've come out of. I think they are Danish, actually. I think it's called Sauna 83. Have you seen them?
Oh, no, but I should look.
Yeah, they're quite interesting. I think it's Sauna 83. And it's basically like a well-branded sauna experience, but they're effectively, for want of a better term, they're kind of like garden sheds on wheels that they kind of have around.
Oh, amazing.
So they're these kind of portable, movable saunas. So it's like pop-up saunas, I guess.
Oh, brilliant.
And that kind of whole experience about how do you kind of that same thought process that we're talking about with Biarca is the same there. It's like, okay, what do people want to do? How do they want to live their lives? And then how can we kind of make interventions, whether it's a big, large building or whether it's a, you know, a very modest kind of sauna, to kind of enable some of that. And I think some of those Nordic cities are great at that. You know, the sort of the lidos that the city provide with steps and diving boards and
also frozen over in the winter.
Yeah.
Swam in one of those too. Yeah, and it's quite something, but it was amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, and that for me, that idea of place, you know, the kind of the bits between the buildings as well as the kind of the physical aspects of the architecture and design, that tied to how people experience life and connection with other people and quality of life, I think is super interesting for us as at Grow Places. And that was my kind of take a little bit on kind of maybe where the interest is outside of the industry from people. You know, when you have a conversation with someone and you say, okay, I'm a developer, they look at me like I've, you know, just committed a crime. Whereas if you say you're kind of interested in place, interested in life, interested in kind of helping to grow, to shape those environments, it's like, oh, okay, you know, that's kind of really quite interesting.
Exactly.
And it takes it onto a different level of conversation. As you say. So I think there's a lot to say about how do we kind of communicate what we do and the value that we bring. Obviously, there's a lot of downsides to the way that the industry kind of functions and has functioned. But if we can actually kind of look at that optimistically about where we go next, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And it's not all. It may well be the big shiny things, but it's also just the little everyday moments about how you connect with your family or your friends, or you take your child to nursery and what's that experience like.
Exactly.
And that's the bit that we're particularly really interested in.
Yeah the everyday.
Yeah and so that kind of idea of how places feel, this notion of kind of public and private, I think is something which is very different in different parts of the world and different cities. Obviously it goes to culture, to government, to the type of kind of society you live in, and that kind of also filters down on the ground and ideas of public private space where you feel as a person you can kind of go into, whether it's community assets or holes in the ice or whatever it might be. So how do you see that aspect of kind of public and private for you?
Well, one of the best things actually about the Oodi library, which I'd forgotten about, was that it's opposite the sort of the city government buildings, and it's purposefully been designed so that the top floor of the library looks into the top floor of the government building in a kind of a mutual decision that the people are on a level with the government, which is beautiful, and you really can see right in. So and I love that idea in terms of, you know, what it represents across the board, but I just love the fact that you can look in and be on that level. But interestingly, I've had a few conversations recently about how public spaces and buildings have become even more powerful now than the private. That, you know, changes in the way that we work, changes in the way that we live. You know, it used to be that going behind closed doors of a shiny, you know, sort of exclusive building was where value lay. And now there are very few buildings, office buildings particularly, that are coming down the line that I'm seeing that do not have some kind of element of public access space in them, which is brilliant, and it's the way it should be, and giving something back. But then also just the power of public space, whether, you know, and it can be public buildings, places like Oodi or other places like that, but also just public space more generally. And I was talking to, it's actually Daniel Libeskind about this, and he was talking about what he'd done at the World Trade Center site, and saying that during and off the back of the pandemic, when obviously everything shut down, and that part of New York was, you know, completely shut down really because of all the private buildings and the offices, that it, as far as he could tell, when things started to open back up, it was actually one of the areas, despite being the financial hub, where people were still not really working. It was one of the areas that picked up more quickly than other areas of New York because of this fantastic public space, and also the memory of what had happened there, which was very, which brings an absolute tragedy, but it does bring people together in a way that a private building, I think, would struggle. So it can be very cohesive public space, very leveling. I mean, what's more leveling than, going to be reminded of what happened there? It doesn't matter who you are, does it? It's gonna get you. So, I think that's very, very interesting and very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, we've both got young families. If you kind of project yourself forward to when your daughter, your kids are in their sort of 20s, 30s, so
God.
we're sort of projecting forward a little bit. What sort of environment would you want them to be living in? I know we've kind of talked about some of that today, but if you were to kind of sum that up about the kind of place that they're living in, and also obviously as a result of that, how the industry has got to that point.
I'd like them to live in a world that is less formal. I think that we live in a less formal world now than we did previously, but I think having children brings you back to being a child in so many ways, and they're so joyful, and again, it's quite emotional. They're so joyful, and they take such pleasure in the simplest things around them, and then the world and life inevitably messes them up, hardens them up. I mean, I say that flippantly, of course it doesn't. That's just life, isn't it? And we become sort of more weathered versions of ourselves. But there's so much to learn from children. There's so much to learn from them across so many facets of life and living, but one of them is around your physical environment. Actually, we were away last weekend, whenever it was, for my mum's 70th birthday, and we went to a house that we were all staying at, and I'd forgotten to pack anything for my kids. I'd forgotten to, no, not anything, but I'd forgotten to pack any toys. So I'd done clothes and everything, but I'd forgotten to pack the toys. And I know that that's not real estate, but it's physical stuff. And for about 5 minutes, I was worried about it. And then they got the cushions off the sofas and made up this game where you had to hop from one to the other or something. And they played it for about an hour and a half, and just that ability to work with what they have around them. So going back to my previous point, I'd love it if the world was a bit more real, a bit less formal. And as I say, a bit less, rules and regulations about who can go and where and who's allowed to do what. And of course, I'm not advocating anarchy, obviously, but I think places and spaces that are just a bit more relaxed. I don't think that this is a personal choice, but very, very highly manicured areas that make you feel a bit anxious and like you can't really put a foot out of place. I think I'd love it if that was less of a thing. I think it already is. I think places are becoming a lot more relaxed, and they are becoming a lot more, mixed use as well. So you don't just have to be going for one thing, and you can go and do lots of different things, and you can have. I like the idea of being able to have kids playing near where people are going to work, and that's life, isn't it? Again, that's life. And we, before our time, it was even more segregated in terms of, you spend your time doing this, and you go to these places for your work, and you have these places for your home, and never the twain shall meet, which is something which is just not the case anymore. And the pandemic in many ways did a great service. I mean, it's awful, but did a great service in some ways to just reminding everybody that we are all part of these wider infrastructures in our lives. It's not just us, whether you've got kids or not, having those Zoom calls with everybody's, but everyone's houses being visible, and it just made it all a lot more human, a lot less formal, and that made me feel much happier. So that's what I want from them.
Yeah.
For them, rather, not from them. For them.
Yeah. No, that's a great answer to that question.
More joy.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I think it also taps into kind of a fundamental thing that we're trying to do, but also I think good places and good buildings do is that they are unfinished. That actually the life that happens within them, the people, the way they inhabit them, having that informality to be able to do things within them, even extending it to built fabric and places. Often people feel more comfortable in places that you can kind of knock around, that aren't too polished, that companies can move walls, or it's like the sort of the feeling of an old pair of jeans in that sense. You kind of go back to that, and I think there's something really kind of sort of deep within that, actually, about how we experience space and can move cushions around and play and explore and not be too controlled in that. I think that's really, really great way to frame that. So thank you for that. So how do you think places can kind of, in that context, then be successful, be future proofed, is kind of something that I know you've talked about in the past. And again, it may well be kind of one and the same thing, but in a way there's something quite nice about this conversation. We seem to be kind of coalescing back to a series of kind of core ideas, and I think that's quite nice, actually, that there's kind of that clarity. Interesting, because that's the way we think about things, and it's interesting that you are thinking about things, and maybe your readership and others are as well.
Yeah, I think, so I suppose flexibility is in a way another way of saying informal, but maybe a more formal way of saying informal. But spaces and places that don't have to be that. Do you know what? I mean, that makes zero sense, but it makes sense to me.
Total sense. Yeah.
Just, and that's another reason that I loved, for example, the buildings I've mentioned. I think all of them share something, which is that they're not one thing, and they can be what everyone that's going there wants it to be. So, with the Oodi, whether you want it to be a library, it can be a library, that's great. Do you want it to be somewhere where your kids can run around? Yep, they've got like a whole kids section, which is, completely padded inside and feels like going to kind of a rabbit warren. You want it to be where you can go and find out about government plans and proposals. The whole ground floor has been given over to government consultations, so they've got all the programs and everything like pinned up. People can go and have a look at it. Do you want to go and have a look at it through the perspective of it being a piece of art? Yes, they've got architects who've designed these in stunning centerpiece stairwells that are pieces of works of art. Do you want to go and do a cookery class? Yes. Do you want and that's a great example. And similarly with the sauna, like, do you want to go and have a sauna? Yes. Do you want to go and have some drinks with your friends? Yes. I didn't know that the bar inside the sauna was actually in the sauna area, and that everyone's sitting there with their wine like wrapped in their towels and everything. But talk about informal, that was amazing. Like no shoes, no makeup. Exactly. Everyone's like in their towels having the best time. And it was, what was really interesting about that was that the conversations that were going on, not that I speak the language, but I could see that the conversations that were going on were just so relaxed in that environment. And that was brilliant. And I could see that people were really tailoring the space to how they wanted to use it. And with that comes so much lightness, I think. And it's the same with a commercial office building in the middle of central London. And some developers are doing it incredibly well. Derwent London are doing some amazing, amazing stuff with their lounge spaces. And, they've seen an uptick in rents because of it, at a time when the offices are really struggling. Why? Because, they've given their occupiers and their occupiers' employees access to spaces where they can go and just do what they want. I mean, not what they want, but they can go and like sit in an armchair, have a meeting, grab some lunch. It's not set. So I think that's for me, that flexibility, whether it's flexibility or informality, are things that people really crave in life.
Yeah, I completely agree. Emily, thank you very much for your time. I think it's been an amazing conversation, and really grateful for your time.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me. It's been brilliant, and I love talking about this stuff. So thank you very much for the opportunity, because it's normally me on the other side. So, I won't say I wasn't a bit nervous, but, it's been great to have a conversation about something which is very close to my heart.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Grow Places podcast. For more information, visit growplaces.com and follow us at We Grow Places across all social channels. See you next time.